Good morning, and welcome to San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Georgetown, Texas. Welcome to our Sunday service. Our mission is to welcome all, to promote personal and spiritual growth, and work for a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. San Gabriel UU Fellowship is a member organization of the Unitarian Universalist Association and is recognized as a welcoming congregation and as a green sanctuary congregation. My name is Frank Sanders, and I'm a founding member of San Gabriel UU. If you would like to learn more about us and what is happening in and around our congregation, I encourage you to look up our website, sangabrieluu.org. If you would like to keep up with upcoming events and activities at San Gabriel, you can sign up to receive our weekly newsletter, The Messenger. And if you would like to learn more about Unitarian Universalism, you can also go to the Unitarian Universalist Association website at uua.org. For our service today, we are pleased to have Mike Sebald join us to talk about immigration issues as they play out in our own community of Georgetown. Mike has resided in Georgetown as a retiree with his wife Elaine since 2014. Mike and Elaine enjoy their home in Old Town and have volunteered in the community in various capacities since their arrival. Mike and Elaine have one daughter, Kate, who resided nearby in San Antonio. He is a graduate of English from the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio and holds a master's degree in English from Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. Mike worked for 37 years for the State Farm Insurance, where he consulted in the claims arena and was responsible for quality control, education, legal compliance, and litigation management. While working and after his retirement, Mike has taught English as a second language and volunteered at private law firms and at Catholic charities, providing immigration legal services. Most recently, Mike and Elaine founded the Immigration Legal Services, a component of GTX Connect, formerly known as the Southeast Georgetown Community Council. The ILS component is an agency licensed by the U.S. Department of Justice to provide low-cost or no-cost legal services, primarily to low-income individuals who generally reside in the Williamson County area. Mike is licensed as an accredited representative for the provision of such services. The flaming chalice unites our members in worship and symbolizes the spirit of our faith. Our chalice lighting for today is entitled, Ignite in Us Radical Love. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. Our opening reading is number 580 in our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed.
Please join as we say our affirmation together. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Good morning, everyone. I've got a wonder box with me, and I wish I could hear your guesses as to what was in this wonder box. We gather together to hear from one another, don't we? And as our third principle states, we help one another learn and grow. But even though I can't hear your guesses, maybe make a guess and share it with someone near you. Slight amount of noise, a little bit of shaking of something in there. What clue does that give you? Let's open up the wonder box and find out what's in here. Oh, so pretty. We've got ourselves a gorgeous monarch butterfly. Our habitat team is creating an environment to help monarchs as they migrate through Texas. Maybe you have seen some of the pictures that have been shared in the messenger. Right now, they are headed to Mexico for winter. Monarchs are often used as a symbol for immigrant rights, which is what we will be learning about today in our service. In the story I'm about to share with you, maybe you can spot some monarchs. Look for them. The story is called
Dreamers by Yuyi Morales, shared with permission from Holiday House Books. I dreamed of you, then you appeared. Together we became amor, love, amor. Resplendent life, you and I. One day we bundled gifts in our backpack and crossed a bridge outstretched like the universe. And when we made it to the other side, thirsty in awe, unable to go back, we became immigrants. Migrantes, you and I. The sky and the land welcomed us in words unlike those of our ancestors. There were so many things we didn't know, unable to understand and afraid to speak. We made lots of mistakes. You and I became caminantes, thousands and thousands of steps we took around this land until the day we found a place we had never seen before. Suspicious, improbable, unbelievable, surprising, unimaginable. Where we didn't need to speak, we only needed to trust, and we did. The baby here is getting a library card. Books became our language, books became our home, books became our lives. We learned to read, to speak, to write, and to make our voices heard. Someday we will become something we haven't yet even imagined. But right now, we are stories. We are two languages. We are lucha. We are resilience. We are hope. We are dreamers, soñadores of the world. We are love, amor, love. The end.
Recently, I saw a t-shirt that said, "Every border implies the violence of its maintenance." And I looked that up. I looked up that quote, and it is attributed to a writer and trend forecaster, and it was from 2015. Her name is Aisha Siddiqui. Borders are expected to provide security, but sometimes I wonder, do they foster the opposite? That's a lot for us to think about. And I know that I am eager to move beyond borders and instead focus on people. I think that's what our Yuyi faith calls us to do. We are so much more alike than not, no matter where we are from. We'll talk more about that in RE time today. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
One world, what touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall.
Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes, with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. Our world is one world. Its ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, who are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
Good morning. My name is Mike Sebald, and I was asked today by two of your fellow congregants, Michelle Augustine and Lou Sneed, to talk about the topic of immigration, because it's a topic that is near and dear to your hearts because of your philosophies and your thoughts. But I don't follow directions well, and rather than talking about immigration, because immigration is an abstract concept. It's a concept in law, it's a public policy issue, and it's many different things to many different people. So rather than talking about immigration, let's talk about immigrants, or let's talk specifically about the immigrant. And because that's who you really value. As Unitarian Universalists, you value the immigrant as being one of many people that you recognize as being a part of your inclusive community. I think it's important for me to disclose a few things, first of all, that make me able to talk about this topic. And so, for purposes of disclosure, I'll let you know that I am an immigrant. And most people, when I tell them that I'm an immigrant, they say, no, you don't look like an immigrant, you don't seem like an immigrant. But I came here to the United States as a 10-year-old boy with my mother and my stepfather, whom she had married. He was an American soldier in Germany. And we came here, we moved to San Antonio. I went to a school that was largely Hispanic in the west side of San Antonio, and I learned how to speak English on the playground from primarily Spanish speakers and a teacher who happened to be a Cajun from Louisiana. So very early on, my immigrant experience was very much like the immigrant experience of many people in the United States today. I was part of a complex culture that I didn't quite understand, didn't quite appreciate, and that quite frankly sometimes amazed me and at other times frightened me. So I am an immigrant, and I became a citizen when I was 23. I went to college, I graduated, got my master's degree, worked in business for 40 years, and then retired and came to Georgetown. I'm one of those good immigrants. And let's keep that concept in mind for a moment, the concept of the good immigrant, because we can fall into that very easily, and we talk about all the good people that are immigrants, not the bad hombres that President Trump talked about. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. I make this introduction because I want to humanize the topic, and I want to talk about people. Now, I was asked as one of the things that I should attend to is to make some remarks about what we can do to influence legislation and to influence public policy as it relates to immigration. And what I will tell you is just forget about that altogether. Just recently I had the opportunity to attend an immigration law conference, virtually of course, sponsored by the Catholic Immigration Legal Network and the Migration Policy Institute of the United States. It's an annual conference of people interested in the practice of immigration law. And I listened to some pretty heady people. I listened to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. I listened to Anthony Romero, the director of the ACLU, and some other pretty important people. And none of the talking heads on my computer monitor was very hopeful about any change or any appreciable change in immigration law anytime in the future. As long as we continue to live in the age of Trump, and as long as the Republican Party has a very strong influence over public policy, there probably will not be any changes. The only thing that some of the more hopeful people in the room thought is that perhaps some moderate Republicans who are trending away from Trump, who are in moderate suburban districts, may try to appeal to soccer moms by proposing some moderate legislation related specifically to DACA, the childhood arrivals in the United States, for whom we currently have no solution. But that's about it. And the reason, of course, that DACA is a popular topic that everybody rallies around is that those DACA immigrants, those innocent children that got here before they knew any better, they are the good immigrants. And so, we need to distinguish between those few good immigrants and all the bad ones out there. More on that later. I want to talk a little bit about why immigrants come to the United States, because I think there are a lot of myths, and those myths come out of our culture, and our culture seems to suggest that we are a nation of immigrants and that we come here for religious freedoms and all sorts of altruistic reasons. But when you take a look at history and when you take a look at then and today, immigration is primarily economic. It's primarily economic. And try to hold on to that thought, because that may be the one way, even if you can't appeal to the general public or your Republican friends in Sun City, you may be able to influence them by talking about the economics of immigrants and what they do for us. If you have been paying attention, you'll notice that in the last 10 years, the United States grew less than it had in many 10-year periods before. and that the primary reason for that was the low fertility rate of the domestic population. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant population is not producing to the point that it replicates itself. The only reason that the United States grew at all during the period of the last 10 years was because of its significant primarily Asian and primarily Hispanic immigration. So if we want to maintain our economy, if we want to maintain the size of our economy, we need immigrants. Now, that's a very shallow argument, but it's an argument that a lot of people will at least listen to. Canada has a actual, not necessarily a quota, but a goal, and their goal is that they want to immigrate at least 300,000 people a year. That's what they feel like they need in order to sustain their economy and in order to continue to grow. 300,000 people. Now, if you take that and extrapolate it to the United States population, we need about 3 million immigrants a year. And what do we need those immigrants for? Because we thought that they took up resources. Well, they don't take up resources, they create. And those immigrants are consumers, they are workers, they rent houses, they buy automobiles, they buy the goods and services, and they go to work and they create goods and services that are consumed and sold and resold. And economists will tell us that it is immigrants that fuel the economy. President Trump wanted to limit immigration to 18,000 people a year. Now, folks, that's pretty bad. And if you've noticed, lately, it's hard to find workers. Might not the lack of immigration be a part of that economic problem? So, anyway, if we don't talk about the humaneness of it all, immigrants are economic. I was an economic immigrant. My mother got married to an American and got herself a ticket out of post-World War Germany, which at the time that she left it was a pretty devastated nation that wasn't really very hospitable to a young post-World War II woman. She wanted a better house, she wanted better groceries, she wanted a better life. Her motivation, she was very honest about, was primarily economic. Now, I know we say to ourselves that the reason that people are immigrating these days is because of the violence and the drugs and the gangs and all the things that they are experiencing. But you know, the history and the research shows very differently. And the research and the history shows that people will put up with an extraordinary amount of violence, an extraordinary amount of lack of freedoms, as long as they are able to feed themselves and house themselves and educate their children. It is only when they begin to starve that they get onto their feet and migrate. And that is the primary reason why we had 14,000 Haitians at our border a few weeks ago. People migrate for economics. And if you think back about your own forebears and when they came to the United States, they came here because of some type of dysfunction within the society in which they lived, and that dysfunction was primarily economics. Now, we need to be honest with ourselves too. We talk about ourselves being, that we're a nation of immigrants, that all of us are immigrants, and therefore we welcome immigrants because we know that America is a nation. Well, you know, we are a nation of immigrants. We've incorporated more immigrants, and a greater proportion of people are immigrants in the United States than just about any other country on earth. And so, you know, we should welcome immigrants automatically because that's who we are. But the fact is, if you take a look at the history of our immigration and the way that it has happened, that immigration is primarily racist, and it primarily works on cultural exclusion. We say that we are one thing, but what we do is quite often very different. You know, you can go back in colonial times, and when I was in college, I did a Being a German American, I did a study in my sociology class on German Americans in the United States, and I found that as far back as John Adams wrote that he did not like the German immigration in Pennsylvania, that he thought it was detrimental to the young country. And he thought it was detrimental because, first of all, they were too Catholic, they weren't Protestant enough. Secondly, they were loud, they drank too much, and they simply had a lack of reserve, and he worried that if we just got too many of these Germans in, that ultimately there would be a decline in Anglo-Saxon civility, and that this would be detrimental to the country. Now, ironically, of all the European immigrants, the Germans ended up being the largest immigration group, and we can trace more of our character and more of our traditions to European Germany than to European England sometimes. And I always point that out. But luckily, as Germans, we were spared much of the racism, even though we were culturally excluded for a while. And that's because we're so hard to pick out. Now, that wasn't true for the Japanese. You know, Germans made it all through World War II without too much problems in the United States, but the Japanese were easy to identify. And so our racism took hold, and the Supreme Court told us that there was nothing wrong with incarcerating them and eliminating them. Things got really, really racist, and when the immigrant wasn't any longer Mike from Germany, the good immigrant, but it was Jose from Mexico or Guatemala or from El Salvador, suddenly things got a little bit more racist. You know, Europeans came here in the 19th century largely unregulated. We had Ellis Island, they went through Ellis Island, and they got processed and they came here. In fact, it's kind of ironic. Back in the 19th century, most immigrants came here because they had a job waiting for them here, and their passage was actually paid for by an American, sometimes an American individual, sometimes an American company. And they essentially came here as a consequence of what was illegal indentured servitude. When I was young, I remember talking to a 100-year-old lady who was from Ireland. She was my landlady's mother. And she had come here from Ireland as a 17-year-old. Her passage was paid for by an Anglo-Saxon family in New York, and she worked for a number of years as a household maid in return for her passage, and then ultimately, made her way on her own as she became an adult. But that was a typical immigration experience, and it was largely unregulated. It wasn't quoted, it wasn't limited, and there were no formal immigration laws. If you got into trouble and you were an immigrant, it was unlikely that you would be returned to your own country because mostly statutes of limitations would take care of that. But then in the 1920s, we decided that we need some immigration rules. And there's one hallmark of immigration law that you need to understand, and that is that immigrants, when they are defined in the law, we don't really look at who is it that we want to come in. Immigration law is basically exclusionary. It talks about who it is that we want to exclude and limit. And one of the first immigration laws was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I believe was in 1924, which made sure that no more Chinese people came in because they were done building the railroad. We didn't need them anymore. And so why did we need all these Asians when they weren't necessary? So we figured out how many people to exclude, and many of the early immigration laws limited themselves to Europeans and to Caucasians. They eliminated people of certain cultures and of certain races. Then we got rid of the bracero system after we decided that we really didn't need those Mexican laborers in as great a numbers as before. We stopped that, and so these folks who had come here to work and that made our food, didn't go on to a track to become citizens, they got sent back home. And again, Europeans never suffered from any problems because, like all enforcement actions of any sort of criminal sort, things are prevented by statutes of limitations. But I'll tell you what, the way that the immigration law is written now, Jose from Mexico is going to be haunted forever for one single little mistake. If you live in the United States without documentation for a year and then leave, the law says that you're excluded from returning and re-entering the United States for 10 years. If you re-enter after you've left and you re-enter once again without permission, you are barred and inadmissible to the United States for life. So that significantly decreases the Latino population in the United States because it makes it almost impossible to correct a single error, that error being entering without inspection, as it's called. That same racist element to keep out people applies to Haitians. Haitians traditionally have had a very difficult time being recognized as a place from which people could seek refuge. We have to understand, too, that we talk about courts. The most common defense that a person usually has as to why they are anti-immigrant or why they think that people should be excluded from the country is they say, well, why can't they do it like my ancestors do it and do it right? Well, it's because it was a whole lot easier to do it right when there were no rules. But now the rules are so stringent that it's almost impossible to get into the country in any reasonable way. And it must be understood that immigrants don't have access to the courts. Immigrants have no constitutional legal rights. If they are caught and we want to deport them, they go through immigration courts, which are not real courts. It's simply a department that's operated by the United States government. They have no constitutional rights, and unlike you or I, if they are accused of something, they do not have the right to counsel at the government's cost. So immigrants are severely limited by their legal rights. In fact, when I receive a response from the United States government regarding the decision that they've made on an application, it's always prefaced with the phrase of USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. USCIS, in its exercise of discretion, has ruled that. In its exercise of discretion. Well, it's very clear that immigration law is a set of statutes and a set of guidelines that's put together by the government based upon the law, but that ultimately things are up to the discretion of a clerk, a functionary, a salaried employee at USCIS. And it's discretionary. If that guy or that gal just doesn't like you, they feel bad about your application, they just don't like the way it's put together, they can deny your application. And going ahead and appealing that is an extremely difficult process because, like I said, you don't have right to counsel, and the process is very difficult. You need to understand, too, how the immigrant is treated in the immigration court. Now, immigration court is a really interesting phenomenon. First of all, the head of all the immigration courts is the Attorney General of the United States. Well, that's an odd thing, because the Attorney General of the United States is there to uphold the laws, but he's also the chief prosecutor. In essence, he's the district attorney for the entire country. And so that's odd. And then the judges that operate in the immigration courts are employees of the Attorney General. Okay, so when one day you become the employee of Jeff Sessions, what does that mean about your judicial philosophy and how you go on and do things? If Jeff Sessions says that you're going to handle 500 cases a month, you handle 500 cases a month. If you don't handle those 500 cases, then you're fired. Well, judges don't get fired. Judges are elected or they serve for life, right? A federal judge serves for life unless he or she is guilty of some malfeasance. But that's not true of the employees of the federal government that run the immigration courts. So the immigration system has a built-in conflict of interest in as much as that immigration judge doesn't necessarily have justice or equity at heart. He has, or she has, the need to satisfy an employer. That's a very, very difficult situation to operate in, which is why immigration judges, unlike other judges, have a union that represents them. They're union employees. So, that's a very strange phenomenon. But let's look at how these employees are treated. As of last year, there were 1,200,000 pending cases before the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. 1.2 million. Last year, 230,000 cases were closed. Okay, 1.2 million pendings, 230,000 closed. The pending case load per immigration judge is an average of 2,400 cases. Now, I can't manage 2,400 cases. I don't know how anybody can. Now, compare that to 2008. And in 2008, when things were a little bit more favorable, there were 186,000 cases pending as opposed to 1.2 million. So you can see what direction we're headed in, and it's not positive. I don't have this year's numbers, but I tend to think that there will be more cases filed than were closed. How did we get to that point? What is it? What do we feel about the average immigrant? How has that average immigrant changed since the day that I immigrated? Well, I was a good immigrant, so nobody cared. Are there any good immigrants anymore? Well, let's go back just into some recent history and find out how immigrants have changed. Since a recent historical event, every immigrant is a potential terrorist. Every immigrant is a potential terrorist, and what we've got to do is we've got to ferret out the terrorists from the non-terrorists. It's good to pause and think about how that became a reality. Back in the year 2000, there was actually a bipartisan committee that included lawyers, nonprofits, interested parties, clerics, people in Congress, and even George W. Bush himself, who was basically, as a Texan, familiar with immigration and what it was all about, and they were looking at doing revolutionary changes to our immigration system to get it back on track. And then 9/11 happened. And after September 11th, 2001, that committee never met again, and immigrants were dead in the water. From that point on, it got worse and worse until the exclusion of Muslims during the Trump administration. Every immigrant is a potential terrorist. And so what did they do? Well, they reorganized things. Immigrants used to be dealt with by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, right? They're an immigration service and they're a naturalization service. It's a place to immigrate and it's a place to become a citizen. Well, that was changed, and the Department of Homeland Security was was created, right? They're the people that keep out the terrorists. And so where do you put immigration? You put it right under that heading of the Department of Homeland Security. And it's a three-part system. It's USCIS, it's CPV, and it's ICE. Okay, so let's go through the initials. USCIS, they're the guys that process the applications, and they're the people I told you about a moment ago with the enormous caseloads, and they process things very, very, very slowly. I have one client who is a applicant for asylum from Venezuela, and he's been here for 5 years. Since he's been here, he's had two American citizen immigrant kids, and he still hasn't had his interview yet to see whether his claim for asylum based upon political persecution will be accepted by USCIS. In fact, people are waiting 5, 10 years for their asylum hearings, and it's more likely that they will become legitimized through some other process, either by marrying an American citizen or some other kind of process, than that their immigration cases will ever be heard. So that's USCIS. They're the folks that process the applications, that issue the green cards, that put out the benefits. Now the second part of it is CPB, Customs and Border Protection. They work together, kind of. Customs and Border Protection, those are the guys with the lassos lassoing Haitians down at the Texas border. Their job is to keep everybody out so that they don't ever become a case with USCIS. And then, of course, there's ICE, which is a cold term. That's the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement folks. And they're the people that go around, they're the ones that go to a workplace and find the undocumented employees and send them back home. So, and the funny thing about those three parts is they're all headed under the same group in Homeland Security, but their jobs are so different that they often compete with each other. So I had one case where a woman was in the process through USCIS of applying for a green card through her U.S. citizen husband. And you would have thought that that would be sufficient, but she's down in the valley and she's driving her truck and she gets stopped by the sheriff for speeding, and he turns her over to Customs and Border Enforcement because she's within 100 miles of the border and she doesn't have any papers with her. They then turn her over to ICE because they think she's potential for being deported. And then ICE, which is a really tricky organization, they send her to a detention camp. And they send her to a detention camp in Georgia because if you can send her to someplace where she's unfamiliar with the environment, where she has no lawyer, where she doesn't have any friends, then she may get confused and not do the right things, and they may be able to go ahead and expedite her deportation. Luckily, we were able to intervene on her behalf through a Catholic Charities affiliate in Atlanta. But even though USCIS is working to legitimize her presence, the two other parts of the agency are working to get rid of her. And that's more common than it is uncommon because they work at cross purposes. So anyway, that's the immigration system, and that's how immigrants, like the lady I just told you about and the asylee from Venezuela, that's how they are treated and all of that. So the question now becomes, as my time is running out, how do you deal with this broken system? What do you do? Well, the question that I was asked to answer was, how do you lobby? How do you do this, that? How do you change things? Well, my personal philosophy is you don't. Because we just don't have the capacity to do so. As individuals, we only have so much influence, and so the way I've decided to do it, the way I decided to deal with it, my fighting back, is that I deal with it one immigrant at a time, one client at a time, one case at a time. because that's what I'm capable of doing. And I have to do it with the system as it is, but I can assist people in navigating that very cold system in a way that they are more likely to have success than if they don't have any help. What we have done here, and I want you to be familiar and to know about our agency here in Georgetown, is we have created an Immigration Legal Services office here in Georgetown. It's at 805 West University in the Community Resource Center. And we work under the aegis of what used to be called Southeast Georgetown Community Council, now GTX Connect. And we work very closely with one of your congregants, Chuck Collins. And we provide immigration legal assistance. How do we do that? Well, first of all, the way we got into this, my wife Elaine and I discovered a couple of years ago, because of my interest in immigrant legal services, we discovered that the United States Department of Justice licenses nonprofits to provide immigration legal services to immigrants, to low-income immigrants who otherwise are not able to afford a private immigration attorney. And in order to become licensed, we had to do a lot of things. We had to develop a law library. We had to find office space. We had to get the appropriate software to interact with the government and to keep records. We had to get office machines and things of that sort. And luckily, Elaine and I worked for a wonderful employer who also has a foundation that provided us with matching grants for anything that we put into the organization. So it made it affordable for us to get that kind of an organization started. In order to do this, I had to become what is called an accredited representative through the Department of Justice. And to get my accreditation, which was a long, convoluted application process, much like the processes that immigrants themselves go through, in order to get that, I had to take a lot of courses, many of them through the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, which is the largest organization, the largest nonprofit organization that provides immigration services in the United States. And I took a number of different courses from them. And then also I had to be sponsored by an immigration attorney, and I had to be familiar and had to work for a period of time as a volunteer in the types of processes that I would be working on once I became accredited. So for a year until COVID hit, I worked for Catholic Charities here in Austin, and I assisted attorneys and other accredited representatives in putting together cases for clients who had various different kinds of needs. At the end of that process, I became licensed, and we now operate independently here in Georgetown. And what we do is we provide legal services to low-income folks who don't need to hire an attorney. We do charge nominal fees, but these fees are very low. For example, if you get somebody to assist you in filing your citizenship application, a private attorney probably is going to charge you at least $2,000 to $2,500. And if you're within 150% of the poverty level here in Georgetown, we'll do it for $325, because our only goal is to cover our rental expenses, and everything else is done by volunteers. We provide primarily what is called family immigration services. What do we do? A family comes to us, and perhaps the husband is a U.S. citizen, but the wife is here undocumented. She came into the United States without inspection and is always subject to deportation. Well, she can apply for a waiver, and the husband can sponsor her and it's a long, convoluted process, but it is possible. We assist young people in their DACA applications. We do some work for asylees and people who are applying for temporary protective status. We help people get their green cards, renew their green cards, get work permits, renew their work permits, and to do those things that one ordinarily must do in order to work and live profitably in the United States. We assist people in their citizenship applications, and you think, why does somebody need assistance to apply to become a citizen? Well, it's gotten pretty complicated, and the form N400, which is the form that you fill out to become a citizen, I think it's got like about 120 questions on it, and they all have to be answered right, or else it becomes a problem. And that form is 20 pages long. The instructions, one of the things that USCIS does is they're very good about providing instructions. And the instructions are only 18 pages long, 2 pages less than the form itself. So, for somebody with a limited education, limited English, and all of that, that's tough. But then, you also need to add identification information, tax information, history of your travels since you've come into the United States, your last 5 addresses that you've lived at, all the employers that have ever employed you, and documentation that you are up to date on your taxes. It's a fairly daunting thing, and pretty much all the things that are required in order to obtain an immigration benefit are like that. So we feel like we provide a really good service. We provide it at a cost that is affordable for people, and we have provided for people in our own community to make them more capable of earning a living and living in the United States. It's highly satisfying work, and I worked in business for 40 years. And never have I been so satisfied with the outcomes of what it is that I handle as a case than I have been in this short time that I've done this kind of work. If you're interested at all in what you can do on a case-by-case basis and how you might be effective in that, and if any of that has any interest for you, I'll be around to talk at the Zoom session after this talk. So I'll be happy to answer any additional questions, and I'll be happy to connect you if you want to be connected. I know that much of my talk has been somewhat negative and critical, but I'm aware of the successes of our nation and the positive things that many, many good people have done in making immigrants a part of our home and a part of our community. You'd be interested in knowing that out of the 310 million people in the United States, 44 million of us are immigrants. 44 million. Now that includes me, that includes the Haitians that were admitted to the United States just recently. 44 million of us. 77% of us are here with appropriate documents, meaning that we are legal. Although I don't like to use that term, I like to use the term documented or undocumented or with documents or without documents. 25% of the population is either immigrant or the direct descendant of an immigrant. So my daughter takes great pride in the fact that she is the direct descendant of an immigrant, and that's part of her identity. But 25% of us. And the United States has more immigrants than any other country on earth. So we're not perfect, but we do more than anybody else, and we need to give ourselves credit for that. We should celebrate who we are, and we should work on being better, and we should all work on being more friendly to the immigrants among us. Again, I'll be here to talk and to answer questions in the Zoom session afterwards, and I thank you for giving me this time to talk to you today.
We extinguish our chalice with the words from Douglas Steere. The ancient question, who am I, inevitably leads to a deeper one. Whose am I? Because there is not identity outside of relationship. You cannot be a person by yourself. To ask, whose am I, is to extend the question far beyond the little self-absorbed self, and wonder, who needs you? Who loves you? To whom are you accountable? To whom do you answer? Whose life is altered by your choices? With whose life is your own all bound up inextricably in obvious or invisible ways?
Bedtime prayers for the children on the U.S. border. Our journey's through and I must sleep. I try so hard, but softly weep, for I'm so scared. I've searched around, and none I know are to be found. This land they promised is so free. It doesn't seem that way to me. But I'm so small. They say they know what's best for me, where I should go. My mommy's gone, now who will care? We've left our loving families there. So here, in tents and chains and dust, I sleep, Señor, and you I'll trust.